the first time Colton Zimmerman saw Penelope Mitchell. She was being dragged from a filthy stagecoach by her stepfather's meaty fist, her dress torn at the shoulder and her face bruised purple along one cheekbone. It was August of 1872 in Stockton, California, and the heat rose from the dusty Main Street in shimmering waves that made everything look like a fever dream. But there was nothing dreamlike about the fear in that woman's green eyes, or the way she stumbled when the man shoved her toward the mercantile. Colton had come down from his mountain homestead for supplies, something he did maybe 4 times a year when absolute necessity drove him from the solitude he preferred. He was a big man, standing well over 6 feet with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway and arms thick with muscle from years of splitting wood, hauling water, and wrestling the wild land into something resembling order. His dark hair hung past his collar, usually tied back with a strip of leather, and his jaw was covered in several days of stubble that would become a full beard before he made it back to town again. Women sometimes stared at him with a mixture of fear and fascination, but he had no use for their attention. He had left civilization behind 3 years ago after watching his parents die of fever within days of each other, and he had no intention of getting tangled up in other people's problems ever again. But something about the way that woman looked at the ground, accepting the violence as though she deserved it, made his hands curl into fists at his sides. "Get inside and fetch what I need," the stepfather was saying, his voice loud enough to carry across the street. He was a portly man with a red face and small, mean eyes. "And do not embarrass me like you did at the last town, you worthless creature." Penelope nodded mutely and hurried toward the store, keeping her head down. Colton watched her disappear inside, then forced himself to turn away. Not his concern, not his problem. He had his own list of supplies to gather, and then he would be gone from this place for another few months at least. He made his way to the general store, loaded his pack with flour, salt, coffee, and other necessities, and was just counting out coins to pay when he heard the commotion outside. Through the window, he could see the stepfather shouting again, and Penelope was on her knees in the dirt, trying to pick up scattered cans of food that had apparently spilled from a bag she had been carrying. "Clumsy fool," the man bellowed, and kicked one of the cans away from her reaching hand. "Cannot trust you to do the simplest task." Other people on the street were watching, but no one intervened. That was how it went in these situations. A man's family was his own business, and decent folk did not interfere. Colton told himself the same thing as he finished his transaction and hefted his pack. He would walk past, get his horse from the livery, and be gone within the hour. But when he stepped outside and saw the stepfather raise his hand to strike Penelope across the face, something inside him snapped. He crossed the distance between them in 4 long strides and caught the man's wrist before the blow could land. "That is enough," he said quietly. The stepfather tried to jerk free, his face going even redder. "Let go of me. This is none of your concern. I am making it my concern." Colton's grip did not waver. Up close, he could see that Penelope's lip was split, and there were older bruises fading to yellow along her jaw. Her eyes were wide as she looked up at him, filled with something that might have been hope or might have been terror. It was hard to tell. "She is my stepdaughter, and I will discipline her as I see fit. You will not." Colton released the man's wrist and took a step back, positioning himself between the stepfather and Penelope. "Not while I am here." A crowd was gathering now, drawn by the confrontation. The stepfather looked around at the watching faces, seemed to calculate his options, and spat into the dirt. "Fine. You want the worthless baggage, you can have her. I wash my hands of her. One less mouth to feed." He turned on his heel and stalked toward the stage coach station, leaving Penelope kneeling in the street surrounded by scattered cans. Colton stood there for a moment, watching the man go, and slowly realized what he had just done. He had just acquired responsibility for another human being, something he had sworn never to do again. He looked down at Penelope, who was staring at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded and got to her feet, moving stiffly as though her body ached all over. She was younger than he had first thought, maybe 22 or 23, with auburn hair that had mostly escaped from its pins, and a slender frame that suggested she had not been eating enough for quite some time. "Thank you," she whispered. "You did not have to do that. I know." He bent to help her gather the scattered cans, then picked up her small canvas bag. "Do you have any belongings, anything you need to collect?" She shook her head. "Just what I am wearing. He sold everything else months ago." Colton nodded slowly, thinking through the implications. He could not leave her here in Stockton with no money and no family. She would end up in one of the saloons or worse. But taking her back to his mountain cabin meant appending the solitary life he had built so carefully. He looked at her bruised face again and made his decision. "I have a place up in the mountains," he said. "It is rough living, but it is safe. You can stay there until you figure out what you want to do next." Hope flared in her eyes, so bright it was almost painful to see. "Truly." "You would do that for a stranger, apparently." He gestured toward the livery. "Come on, we have a long ride ahead of us." The journey up into the Sierra Nevada foothills took most of the afternoon. Colton rode his big roan gelding and Penelope sat behind him, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist. She did not speak much, and when she did it was only to answer direct questions. Yes, her stepfather had been treating her this way for about 2 years, ever since her mother died. No, she had no other family. No, she had never learned a trade or skill beyond basic household tasks. Yes, she could cook and clean and mend. No, she did not expect charity and would work to earn her keep. Colton found himself oddly relieved by her practicality. He had half-expected tears or dramatic gratitude, neither of which he would have known how to handle. Instead, she sat quietly behind him, her thin arms barely touching him, as though she was afraid to take up too much space even on the back of his horse. The cabin appeared as they crested a ridge in the late afternoon sunlight. It was a solid structure that Colton had built himself from logs he had cut and hauled, with a stone chimney and a covered porch that faced east toward the valley below. Behind it were a small barn for his horse, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and a root cellar dug into the hillside. A creek ran nearby, providing fresh water year-round. It was not fancy, but it was home, and Colton felt the familiar sense of peace settle over him as they approached. Penelope slid down from the horse before he could help her and looked around with wide eyes. "You built all of this yourself?" "Most of it. The barn was already here when I claimed the land." He dismounted and began unsaddling the gelding. "The cabin is not large, but there is a loft where you can sleep. I will stay down below." She nodded, still looking around as though she could not quite believe what she was seeing. Her gaze landed on the empty space beside the cabin, where the soil looked recently turned but nothing was growing. "What is that area for?" Colton glanced at the bare patch of earth and felt a strange twist in his chest. "I was thinking about putting in a vegetable garden," he said, though in truth he had not thought about it much at all. The idea had simply appeared in his mind as he looked at her pale, underfed face. "Would be useful to have fresh greens and such." "I could help with that," Penelope said quickly. "I am good with plants. My mother used to keep a garden before she got sick. We will see." He finished with the horse and carried his pack toward the cabin. "Come on, I will show you inside." The cabin was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace at one end, a rough-hewn table and chairs in the middle, and Colton's bed in the corner. Shelves lined one wall, holding supplies and a few books. A ladder led up to the loft, which was currently empty except for some stored furs and tools. Colton climbed up and moved things around to make space, then came back down with an armful of pelts. "You can use these for bedding," he said, handing them to Penelope. "I will make you a proper mattress later, but this will do for tonight." She took the furs, her fingers running over the soft surfaces. "These are beautiful. Did you trap them yourself?" "Yes. I sell them in town sometimes when I need cash money." He moved to the fireplace and began building up the fire. "Are you hungry? I have venison stew from yesterday." "I am always hungry," she said softly, then seemed to catch herself. "I mean, yes, thank you. That would be wonderful." They ate in near silence, but it was not an uncomfortable quiet. Penelope seemed content to simply sit and absorb her new surroundings, and Colton was not much for conversation at the best of times. He watched her eat, noting the way she savored each bite as though it might be her last meal, and felt that strange protective instinct rise up in him again. After dinner, Penelope insisted on cleaning the dishes despite his protests. He watched her work at the basin, her movements efficient and practiced, and wondered what he had gotten himself into. He had spent 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of complication, and now he had brought it right into his home. But when she turned to him with a shy smile, her split lip pulling slightly, and said, "Thank you again, Mr. Zimmerman. I know I said it before, but I truly mean it. You saved my life today." He found he did not regret his decision. "Call me Colton," he said gruffly, "and you are welcome." That night, lying in his bed while Penelope settled into the loft above him, Colton stared at the ceiling beams and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in his space. The soft rustle of her movements, the quiet sigh as she lay down, the barely audible whisper of her breathing. It should have bothered him, this intrusion into his carefully ordered solitude. Instead, he found it oddly comforting. He fell asleep thinking about gardens and wondering where he could get seeds this late in the season. The next morning, Colton woke before dawn as he always did and found Penelope already up, trying to figure out how to work the coffee pot. He took over with a grunt and showed her his system, then sent her to collect eggs from the chickens while he made breakfast. She came back with 6 eggs in her apron, looking pleased with herself. "They are friendly," she said. "I was worried they might peck me. They are used to being handled." He cracked the eggs into a pan. "Can you milk a goat?" She shook her head. "I can learn. I will teach you after we eat." He glanced at her. "If you are going to stay here, even temporarily, you need to pull your weight. I will not coddle you." "I do not want to be coddled," she said firmly. "I want to be useful," and she was. Over the next few days, Penelope proved herself willing to learn any task he set before her. She mastered milking the goats, learned to feed the chickens and collect eggs without getting pecked, and took over most of the cooking and cleaning without being asked. She mended his shirts, which had been falling apart for months, and reorganized his supplies into a system that actually made sense. She never complained, never balked at hard work, and never asked for anything beyond basic necessities. But Colton noticed things. He noticed the way she flinched when he moved too quickly. He noticed how she always positioned herself near an exit, as though ready to flee at any moment. He noticed that she barely took up any space, as though trying to make herself invisible. And he noticed that she never, ever spoke about herself unless directly questioned. On the 4th day, he found her standing in the empty patch of earth beside the cabin, her hands clasped in front of her and her expression wistful. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Flowers," she said softly. "My mother used to grow them. Nothing fancy, just wildflowers and daisies and whatever else would grow in our little plot, but they made her so happy. She smiled, but it was a sad expression. I have not seen flowers in a long time. Not since she died. Colton looked at her profile, at the way the morning light caught in her auburn hair and made it glow like copper. An idea was forming in his mind, something entirely impractical and foolish, but also entirely necessary. What kind of flowers did she grow? He asked. Penelope turned to him, surprised. Oh, all kinds. Sunflowers, black-eyed Susans, columbines, wild roses, anything that would survive in the heat. He nodded slowly, filing the names away. I need to make a trip down to the valley tomorrow. Supply run. You will be all right here on your own for a day, of course. She looked uncertain. Is there something you need me to do while you are gone? Just the usual chores. And maybe start clearing this patch of earth. Pull out any rocks or roots you find. Her eyes lit up with understanding. You are really going to plant a garden, seems practical. Like you said, fresh greens would be useful. He did not mention the flowers. That would be a surprise. The next day, Colton rode down to Stockton with a specific mission in mind. He had never bought flower seeds before and had no idea where to even start. But the woman who ran the general store took pity on him and helped him select varieties that would grow well in mountain soil. He bought sunflowers and black-eyed Susans like Penelope had mentioned, but also added cosmos and zinnias and sweet peas because the store woman said they were hardy and beautiful. He bought vegetable seeds too, to maintain the pretense of practicality, and then made a stop at the hardware store for proper gardening tools. The store owner, a grizzled old man named Dutch, raised his eyebrows at Colton's purchases. Putting in a garden, Zimmerman. That does not seem like your style. Times change, Colton said shortly and paid for his items. He also bought fabric for a new dress for Penelope, though he had to guess at her measurements. The woman at the dry goods store tried to engage him in conversation about who the dress was for, but he shut that down with a look and left with his purchases before she could pry further. It was late afternoon when he returned to the cabin. Penelope had cleared the garden plot as he had asked, and had also made considerable progress on a woodpile he had been meaning to split for weeks. She came running when she heard his horse, her face lighting up in a way that made his chest feel tight. You were gone so long I was starting to worry, she said, then immediately looked embarrassed. I mean, not that you cannot take care of yourself, I bought you something, Colton interrupted, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out the wrapped package of fabric. For a new dress. The one you have is falling apart. Penelope took the package with trembling hands, her eyes going wide. You bought me fabric. You need something decent to wear. He dismounted and began unloading his other purchases. There is a sewing kit inside if you need needles and thread. She unwrapped the fabric slowly, reverently, revealing the soft blue cotton printed with tiny white flowers. For a long moment she just stared at it, and then to Colton's horror, tears began streaming down her face. Did I choose wrong? He asked, alarmed. The woman at the store said it was a good color, but if you do not like it, no one has ever bought me anything before, Penelope whispered, clutching the fabric to her chest. Not since my mother died. He sold all her things and he never replaced them. I have been wearing this same dress for 2 years. She looked up at him, her green eyes swimming with tears. Why are you being so kind to me? What do you want from me? The question struck him like a physical blow. I do not want anything from you except honest work for fair keep. You are not a servant, Penelope. You are a person who deserves basic decency. She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly and wiped her eyes. I am sorry. I am not used to this, to kindness. Then get used to it, he said gruffly, and turned back to his horse to hide his own emotion. Now help me unload these supplies before the sun sets." They worked together in companionable silence, carrying bags and bundles into the cabin. Penelope did not notice the seed packets until Colton deliberately left them on the table while he went to tend the horse. When he came back inside, she was holding a packet of sunflower seeds with an expression of such pure wonder that he had to look away. "You bought flower seeds," she said. "You are going to plant flowers." "I thought the garden could use some color," he said, busying himself with putting away supplies. "And you said you liked them." "I love them." She set down the sunflower seeds and picked up the zinnias, then the cosmos, examining each packet as though it contained precious jewels. "Colton, this is I do not know what to say." "Then do not say anything. Just plant them when the time is right." But Penelope was not listening. She crossed the room to where he stood and before he could react, wrapped her arms around him in a fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Colton stood frozen for a moment, his arms at his sides, completely unprepared for the contact. She was warm and soft and smelled faintly of wood smoke and soap, and he realized with a jolt that he had not been touched with affection by another human being in 3 years. Slowly, carefully, he brought his arms up and returned the embrace, his large hands gentle on her back. "You are welcome," he said quietly. She pulled back after a moment, her cheeks flushed pink, and returned to examining the seeds. Colton watched her, noting the way her fingers lingered on each packet, the way her smile grew with each new variety she discovered. Something was shifting inside him, some carefully constructed wall beginning to crumble, and he was not entirely sure how he felt about it. That night, Penelope stayed up late cutting and sewing her new fabric by lamplight while Colton sat at the table pretending to read. He kept sneaking glances at her, at the careful way she measured and stitched, at the small, satisfied smile on her face. She caught him looking once, and that smile widened. "It has been so long since I had a project," she said. "Something that was mine." "What else did you used to do?" "Before your stepfather," her smile faded slightly. "I used to read when my mother was alive. She taught me herself since we could not afford school, and I liked to draw, though I was not very good at it. Mostly I just liked spending time in the garden with her." She paused in her sewing. "What about you? What did you do before you came up here?" Colton was quiet for a moment. "My parents had a farm outside Sacramento. I worked there until they died of fever. After that, I could not stay. Too many memories, so I came up here and built this place." "I am sorry about your parents," Penelope said softly. "Losing someone you love is the hardest thing in the world." "Yes," he agreed. "It is." They sat in comfortable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. When Penelope finally went up to the loft to sleep, Colton found himself missing her presence even though she had only climbed a ladder. He was getting attached, he realized. Despite all his intentions to keep his distance, to let her stay only until she found somewhere else to go, he was starting to care about her. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt almost like relief. The next morning dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for planting. After breakfast, Colton and Penelope went out to the garden plot together, armed with the seeds and new tools. He had planned to just show her the basics and then leave her to it, but she insisted he help. "I want to do it together," she said. "Please." So they worked side by side, Colton digging rows while Penelope followed behind, carefully placing seeds and covering them with soil. She had him plant the vegetables on one side and the flowers on the other, creating a clear division between practical and beautiful. As they worked, she talked more than he had ever heard her talk before, telling him stories about her mother's garden and the things they used to grow together. She always said that gardens were proof that good things could come from hard work and patience, Penelope said, patting soil over a row of zinnia seeds. That you just had to have faith and tend things properly and beauty would follow. Sounds like she was a wise woman, Colton said. She was. Penelope sat back on her heels and looked at the freshly planted garden with satisfaction. I think she would have liked you. Why do you say that? Because you are kind. Truly kind, not just polite. There is a difference. She turned to look at him, her green eyes serious. You did not have to help me in town that day. You did not have to bring me here or buy me fabric or plant a garden just so I could have flowers. But you did all those things anyway, and you do not act like I owe you for them. That is rare. Colton felt heat rise in his face and ducked his head, suddenly very interested in the row he was digging. I am just doing what is right. Most people do not, Penelope said quietly. Most people just look the other way. They finished planting in companionable silence, and when the last seed was in the ground, Colton helped Penelope to her feet. Their hands touched, and for a moment neither of them pulled away. Then Penelope smiled and squeezed his fingers gently before letting go. Now we wait, she said. And hope. Over the following weeks, Penelope tended the garden with devotion that bordered on obsession. She watered it every morning and evening, pulled weeds as soon as they appeared, and checked constantly for the first signs of growth. Colton found himself checking too, though he tried to be subtle about it. He wanted to see her face when the first shoots broke through the soil. In the meantime, they fell into an easy routine. Colton would rise before dawn and do the heavy outdoor work chopping wood, hunting, making repairs while Penelope handled the household tasks and animal care. They cooked together in the evenings, and afterward Penelope would sew or read from one of Colton's small collection of books while he carved or mended tools. It was domestic and peaceful, and nothing like the solitary existence he had been living before, but Colton found he did not miss his old life at all. What surprised him most was how much he enjoyed simply being in Penelope's presence. She was not demanding or dramatic. She did not need constant entertainment or attention. She was content to sit quietly or to engage in actual conversation, whichever suited the moment. And she had a quiet strength that he admired, a resilience that kept her moving forward despite everything she had been through. He noticed other things too. The way she hummed while she worked. The way she always made sure he had coffee in the morning without him having to ask. The way her face lit up when she laughed, which was happening more and more often as the bruises faded and she grew comfortable in her new life. The way she looked at him sometimes, with an expression he could not quite decipher, but that made his heart beat faster. He was falling for her. The realization came to him one evening as he watched her move around the cabin, preparing dinner. She had been with him for nearly a month, and in that time, she had transformed from a frightened, beaten-down woman into someone vibrant and alive. Her auburn hair gleamed in the lamplight, and the blue dress he had bought her fit perfectly now that she had finished it. She was beautiful and kind and brave, and he was absolutely, completely falling in love with her. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like coming home. Colton, Penelope was looking at him with concern. Are you all right? You have been staring at the wall for 5 minutes. I am fine, he said quickly. Just thinking. About anything in particular? Yes, he thought. About how much I want to kiss you. About how much I want to tell you to stay forever. About how much you have changed my life without even trying. Just wondering when those seeds will sprout, he said instead. Penelope's face broke into a radiant smile. Soon, I hope. I check every morning, but nothing yet. 3 days later, Colton was coming back from checking his trap line when he heard Penelope calling his name. He broke into a run, worried something was wrong, But when he reached the cabin, he found her standing by the garden with tears streaming down her face and the biggest smile he had ever seen. "Look," she said, pointing at the ground. "Look, Colton." He followed her gesture and saw tiny green shoots pushing up through the dark soil. The seeds were sprouting. The garden was beginning to grow. "I cannot believe it," Penelope was saying, her voice choked with emotion. "I was so afraid nothing would come up, but look at them. They are so small and perfect and alive." Colton stood beside her and looked at the fragile shoots, feeling an absurd sense of pride. He had done this. He had planted these seeds so that this woman could have something beautiful in her life, and it had worked. "They are going to need a lot of care," he said. "Young plants are fragile. I will take care of them," Penelope promised, "every single day." She turned to him, her eyes still wet with tears. "Thank you for this, for giving me something to nurture and watch grow. You have no idea what it means to me." He wanted to tell her that he did know, that watching her happiness bloom was worth more to him than any amount of solitude, that she had brought light into his life in ways he had not known he needed. But the words stuck in his throat, so instead he just nodded and said, "I am glad they are growing." That night, Penelope came down from the loft after Colton had already gone to bed. He heard her soft footsteps and opened his eyes to find her standing beside his bed in her nightgown, looking uncertain. "Can I sleep down here tonight?" she asked quietly. "I know it is improper, but I have been having nightmares about my stepfather finding me, and I would feel safer if I was not alone." Colton's chest tightened at the vulnerability in her voice. "Of course," he said, sitting up. "Take the bed, I will sleep on the floor." "No, that is not fair. The floor is hard and you work so much harder than I do." She bit her lip. Would it be all right if we shared? I promise I will stay on my side." Every proper instinct told him to refuse. She was an unmarried woman. He was an unmarried man, and sharing a bed crossed a line that should not be crossed. But the fear in her eyes overrode his sense of propriety. "All right," he said, moving to one side of the bed. "But you have to promise to wake me if you have a nightmare." No suffering in silence. She smiled with relief and climbed into the bed beside him, careful to leave space between them. "I promise." They lay in the darkness, both very aware of the other's presence. Colton could hear her breathing, could feel the warmth of her body even though they were not touching. He kept his eyes on the ceiling and his hands firmly at his sides. "Colton," Penelope's voice was very soft. "Yes. I am glad you found me that day in Stockton. I do not think I would have survived much longer with him." "You are stronger than you think," he said. "You would have found a way, maybe, but I am glad I did not have to." She was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you help me? You could have walked away like everyone else. Why did you get involved?" Colton thought about it, trying to find the right words. "I could not stand to see someone being hurt when I had the power to stop it," he said finally. "My mother always said that a person's character is defined by what they do when no one is watching, when there is no reward for doing the right thing. I helped you because it was right, not because I expected anything in return. Your mother sounds like she was a good woman. She was the best." He felt the familiar ache of loss in his chest. "She would have liked you too." Penelope turned on her side to face him, and even in the darkness he could see the gleam of her eyes. "I like being here with you," she said softly. "I feel safe for the first time in years. I just wanted you to know that. I like having you here," he admitted, the words coming easier in the dark. "The cabin feels less empty now." She reached out and found his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Good night, Colton. Good night, Penelope." They fell asleep like that, hands clasped between them, and Colton did not have a single nightmare. When he woke in the morning, he found Penelope curled against his side. her head resting on his chest and her arm draped over his waist. He knew he should wake her, should put some proper distance between them, but instead he just held still and savored the feeling of her in his arms. This was dangerous territory they were entering. He knew that, but he also knew that he did not want to step back. After that night, Penelope slept in Colton's bed more often than not. They never discussed it, never acknowledged what it might mean. She would simply come down from the loft with her blanket and settle beside him, and he would make room for her without comment. Sometimes they talked in the darkness about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Sometimes they just lay in comfortable silence. And always, they woke up tangled together, closer than they had been when they fell asleep. The garden grew rapidly in the warm summer sun. The vegetable plants came up strong and healthy, promising a good harvest. But it was the flowers that captured Penelope's heart. She would spend hours just sitting beside them, watching them grow, her face peaceful and content. The sunflowers stretched toward the sky. The cosmos added splashes of pink and white. The zinnias bloomed in riots of color, and the sweet peas climbed the small trellis Colton had built. On the morning when the first sunflower bloomed, Penelope woke Colton at dawn by practically dragging him out of bed. "You have to come see," she said, her excitement palpable. The first flower opened. He let her pull him outside in his bare feet, still half asleep, and there it was. A single perfect sunflower, its yellow petals unfurled in the early morning light. Penelope stood before it with her hands clasped to her chest, looking like she might cry. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she whispered. Colton looked at her instead of the flower. "Yes," he agreed, "it is." She turned to him and seemed to realize how close they were standing. The air between them felt charged with something electric, something that had been building for weeks. Colton reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek. "Penelope," he said, his voice rough. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I did not plant this garden just so we would have fresh vegetables. I planted it for you, because you said you had never been given flowers, and I wanted to give you an entire garden of them." He took a breath. "I wanted to give you something beautiful because you deserve beautiful things. Because you make my life better just by being in it. Because he stopped, suddenly afraid to say the words. "Because you what?" Penelope prompted, her eyes searching his face. "Because I love you," he said simply. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know I am just a rough mountain man with nothing much to offer, but I love you and I want you to stay. Not as a guest or someone I am helping, but as my partner, my equal, my wife, if you will have me." Penelope was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was also smiling. "You love me, more than I thought I could love anyone." She threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him backward. "I love you too," she said against his shoulder. "I have loved you since the day you bought me fabric. Maybe even since the day you stopped my stepfather from hitting me. You are the best man I have ever known, Colton Zimmerman, and yes, I will stay. I will be your wife and your partner and anything else you want me to be." Colton wrapped his arms around her waist and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while she laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and perfect, and it tasted like hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Penelope looked up at him with eyes that shone like stars. "I cannot believe you planted me a garden," she said. "An entire garden just so I could have flowers." "You said you had never been given flowers before," Colton reminded her. "I wanted to make sure you would have them every day for the rest of your life." "The rest of my life," she repeated, testing out the words. "I like the sound of that. So do I." They stood there in the early morning light, surrounded by growing things and new beginnings, and Colton felt a peace settle over him that he had not known since before his parents died. He had thought he wanted solitude, that he was better off alone. But now he understood that what he had really been waiting for was this woman, this moment, this future stretching out before them. "We should go into town soon," Penelope said practically, though she made no move to leave his arms. "If we are going to get married, we will need to make it legal." "We can go next week," Colton agreed. "But in my heart, you are already my wife. And you are already my husband." She kissed him again, softer this time. "Thank you for saving me, Colton. In every way a person can be saved. You saved me too," he said. "I just did not know I needed saving until you came along." They went back inside to make breakfast together, and Colton marveled at how natural it felt, how right. This was what he had been missing all these years of solitude, not just companionship but partnership. Not just someone to share his space, but someone to share his life. The following week, they made the journey down to Stockton. Colton had been worried that Penelope might be afraid to return to the town where her stepfather had abandoned her. But she sat behind him on the horse with her arms wrapped confidently around his waist and her chin held high. "I am not the same person I was when I left here," she said when he asked if she was all right. "That woman was afraid and alone. Now I have you, and I am not afraid of anything." They were married in a simple ceremony at the town church, with the preacher's wife and the general store owner serving as witnesses. Penelope wore her blue dress with a crown of wildflowers that Colton had picked that morning, and Colton wore his cleanest shirt and had actually trimmed his beard for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Colton kissed his bride with such tenderness that the preacher's wife dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. After the ceremony, they went to the general store to pick up supplies and spread the word that Penelope Mitchell was now Penelope Zimmerman. The store owner, a kindly woman named Martha, was delighted by the news. "I have been hoping someone would snap up our mountain man," she said with a wink. "He has been alone up there too long." "Not anymore," Penelope said, smiling at Colton. "Now he is stuck with me." "I think I can bear the hardship," Colton said dryly, and Martha laughed. They also stopped at the land office to officially add Penelope's name to the property deed. The clerk raised his eyebrows at a woman owning land, but Colton's intimidating presence convinced him not to argue. When they left the office, Penelope was beaming. "I've never owned anything before," she said. "Not really. Everything always belonged to someone else." "It belongs to both of us now," Colton said. "Everything I have is yours." They rode back to the cabin in the afternoon sunshine, and when they arrived, the garden greeted them with an explosion of color. More flowers had bloomed in their absence. Pink cosmos swaying in the breeze, bright zinnias like scattered jewels, sweet peas climbing toward the sky. Penelope dismounted and went straight to them, her face alight with joy. "Look how much they have grown," she called to Colton. "We will have flowers all summer at this rate." "That was the idea," he said, coming to stand beside her. He pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I want you to have flowers every day, remember? I will never forget." She turned in his arms and looked up at him. "I will never forget any of this. The garden, the proposal, the way you look at me like I am something precious. You have given me a life I never dreamed I could have." "We have given each other a life," he corrected. "I was just existing before you came. Now I am living." That night, they consummated their marriage in Colton's bed, which was now their bed. It was Penelope's first time, and Colton was infinitely gentle, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, she lay in his arms with her head on his chest, tracing patterns on his skin with her fingertips. "I love you," she murmured sleepily. "Did I mention that?" Once or twice, Colton said, amused, but I never get tired of hearing it. Good. Because I plan to say it every day for the rest of our lives. I will hold you to that. They fell asleep tangled together, and when Colton woke in the middle of the night, he took a moment to simply watch his wife sleep. Her face was peaceful, free of the fear and tension that had marked it when they first met. She looked younger now, happier, whole. He had done that. His decision to intervene, to help a stranger, to open his home and his heart had led to this moment. And he would make the same choice 1,000 times over. Summer stretched into fall, and the garden continued to bloom. Penelope picked flowers every morning and arranged them in jars around the cabin, filling their home with color and life. They also harvested the vegetables, which Penelope preserved and canned for the coming winter. She took pride in her work, in contributing to their household in tangible ways. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Colton would hunt and trap and maintain the property, while Penelope managed the garden and animals and house. But they also made time for each other, for long walks in the woods and lazy afternoons by the creek and evenings spent in each other's arms. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their thoughts and dreams and fears without reservation. In September, Penelope missed her monthly courses. She did not say anything at first, not wanting to get Colton's hopes up in case she was wrong. But when she missed them a second time and began feeling ill in the mornings, she knew she had to tell him. She found him chopping wood behind the cabin, his powerful muscles flexing with each swing of the axe. She watched him for a moment, admiring the way his body moved, the way his hair had come loose from its tie and fell around his face. He was beautiful in a rough, masculine way that still made her heart race even after months of marriage. "Colton," she called, "can you stop for a moment? I need to tell you something." He sank the axe into the chopping block and turned to her, wiping sweat from his brow. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong, at least I do not think so." She took a breath. "I think I might be pregnant." Colton went very still. "Pregnant," he repeated. "I have missed my courses twice now, and I have been feeling ill in the mornings. I cannot be certain without seeing a doctor, but all the signs are there." She searched his face anxiously. "Are you upset? We never talked about children." "Upset?" Colton crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and picked her up, spinning her around just like he had the day they got engaged. "Penelope, I am thrilled. I could not be happier." She laughed with relief and held onto his shoulders. "Truly, you want a baby." "I want everything with you," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "A baby, a family, a whole life together. This is wonderful news." "I am a little scared," she admitted. "I do not know the first thing about being a mother. You will learn. We will learn together." He placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "Is it safe for you to keep working in the garden? I do not want you to overexert yourself." "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she said with a laugh. "I can still do everything I normally do, at least for now. The garden is not going anywhere." "I am going to build a cradle," Colton announced, "and we will need to make more room in the cabin, maybe add on a nursery." "We have time," Penelope reminded him. "The baby will not be here until spring." But Colton was already planning, his mind racing with all the things he needed to do to prepare for their child. Penelope watched him with amusement and love, grateful beyond measure that she had found a man who was so excited about building a family with her. The next few months passed in a blur of activity. Colton began construction on an addition to the cabin, creating a small nursery that connected to their bedroom. He also built a beautiful cradle from polished oak, carving flowers into the headboard to match Penelope's garden. Penelope sewed baby clothes and blankets, using fabric that Colton bought on his supply runs. They talked endlessly about names and futures and all the things they would teach their child. Winter came, bringing snow to the mountains. The garden died back, but Penelope did not mourn its passing. She knew it would return in the spring, just in time for their baby to arrive. She spent the cold months staying warm by the fire, her belly growing round with their child, while Colton kept her supplied with firewood and venison, and anything else she needed. "You are going to spoil me," she teased one evening as he brought her yet another cup of tea without being asked. "That is my right as your husband," he said, kissing her forehead, "especially when you are carrying our child. I am not fragile, you know. I can still help with chores." "I know you are not fragile. You are the strongest person I have ever met." He settled beside her on the bed and placed a hand on her belly. "But let me take care of you anyway. It makes me happy." The baby kicked against his palm and Colton's face lit up with wonder. "Did you feel that?" "I feel it all the time," Penelope said with a smile. "Your child is very active." "Our child," he corrected. "And I am glad. It means they are healthy." In March, as the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, Penelope went into labor. Colton had brought a midwife up from Stockton 2 weeks earlier, a capable woman named Ruth, who had delivered hundreds of babies in her long career. She stayed with them in the cabin, sleeping in the loft and helping Penelope prepare for the birth. When Penelope's contractions started in the early morning hours, Colton wanted to stay by her side, but Ruth shooed him out of the cabin, insisting that he would just be in the way. "Go check your trap lines or chop some wood," she ordered. "This is women's work and you will only make her nervous by hovering." "I want to stay," Penelope said weakly between contractions. "Please let him stay." Ruth looked between them and sighed. "Fine, but he stands in the corner and does not interfere." "Agreed." "Agreed," Colton said quickly, and took up a position where he could see Penelope's face but not get in Ruth's way. The labor was long and difficult. Penelope was strong, but it was her first child and the baby was large. Colton watched helplessly as she struggled through contraction after contraction, her face pale with pain. He hated seeing her suffer and being unable to do anything about it. "You are doing so well," he kept telling her. "You are the bravest person I know. Just a little longer." "Easy for you to say," Penelope gasped between contractions. "You are not the one pushing a human out of your body." Despite the situation, Colton had to fight back a smile. Even in pain, his wife had spirit. Finally, after nearly 12 hours of labor, the baby was born. Ruth caught the infant and quickly cleared its airways, and moments later a loud, healthy cry filled the cabin. "It is a boy," Ruth announced, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket and handing him to Penelope. "A big, strong boy." Penelope cradled her son with tears streaming down her face. "He is perfect," she whispered. "Colton, look at him. He is perfect." Colton moved to the bed and looked down at his son and felt his entire world shift. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was red-faced from crying, but he was the most beautiful thing Colton had ever seen. He reached out with one finger and touched the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers closed around his. "Hello, little one," Colton said softly. "I am your father." The baby stopped crying and seemed to look at him, though Colton knew newborns could not see very well yet. He was overwhelmed with love and protectiveness, and a fierce determination to give this child the best life possible. "What should we name him?" Penelope asked, looking up at Colton with exhausted joy. They had discussed names for months but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Colton knew exactly what felt right. "How about Samuel?" he suggested. "After my father." "Samuel Zimmerman," Penelope tested out the name. "I like it. Samuel it is." Ruth stayed with them for another week, helping Penelope recover from the birth and teaching her how to nurse and care for the baby. Colton hovered anxiously, wanting to help but not sure what to do. Ruth finally took pity on him and showed him how to change diapers and swaddle the baby, tasks he approached with the same seriousness he brought to everything else. "You are going to be a good father," Ruth told him on the day she prepared to leave. "That boy is lucky to have you." "I am the lucky one," Colton said, watching Penelope rock Samuel by the fire. "Both of them saved my life in ways they will never understand." After Ruth left, the three of them settled into their new life as a family. The days were exhausting, filled with feedings and diaper changes and the constant needs of a newborn. But they were also filled with joy. Colton loved watching Penelope with their son, the gentle way she sang to him, and the fierce love in her eyes. And he loved holding Samuel himself, feeling the weight of his son in his arms, and knowing that he had helped create this perfect little person. As spring turned to summer, Penelope began working in the garden again, this time with Samuel in a sling against her chest. She planted all the same flowers from the year before, plus a few new varieties she wanted to try. The garden bloomed even more beautifully than before, as though celebrating the new life that had come into their home. "Look, Samuel," Penelope would say, holding the baby up to see the flowers. "These are sunflowers. Your father planted them for me before you were born because he loves me. Someday, when you are older, I will teach you how to garden too." Colton watched these moments from a distance, his chest tight with emotion. He had thought he knew what love was, but becoming a father had opened up entirely new depths of feeling. He would die for this child without hesitation. He would move mountains, fight bears, do anything necessary to keep Samuel safe and happy. One evening, when Samuel was about 3 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Colton and Penelope sat on the porch watching the sunset. Penelope was leaning against his shoulder, her hand in his, and everything felt perfect and complete. "You ever think about that day in Stockton?" Penelope asked. "When you stopped my stepfather?" "Sometimes," Colton admitted. "Why? I think about it all the time, about how different my life would be if you had just walked away like everyone else. I probably would have died that winter or ended up in a brothel or married to someone equally terrible." She turned to look at him. "You saved me, Colton. You gave me a life worth living." "You gave me the same thing," he said. "Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made me want to live again, to build something more than just a solitary life." "I love you," Penelope said. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. What if something happened to you? What if—" "Nothing is going to happen to me," Colton interrupted gently. "I am not going anywhere. I plan to grow old with you, Penelope. I plan to watch Samuel grow up and have children of his own. I plan to spend the rest of my life picking flowers with you in that garden." She smiled through tears. "That sounds perfect." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. From inside the cabin came the soft sounds of Samuel stirring, and Penelope rose to tend to him. Colton followed her inside and watched as she lifted their son from the cradle and settled into the rocking chair to nurse him. This was his life now. This woman, this child, this home they had built together. It was nothing like what he had planned when he first came to the mountain seeking solitude. It was so much better. The years passed peacefully. Samuel grew into a healthy, happy child with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Penelope's garden became a fixture of their lives, blooming faithfully every spring and summer and providing a constant source of joy. She would take Samuel out there every morning to pick flowers, teaching him the names of each variety and how to care for growing things. When Samuel was 3, Penelope became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after Penelope's mother. The little girl had auburn hair like Penelope and a temperament to match, sweet and gentle but with an underlying strength. Colton built another addition onto the cabin to give the children their own room, and the home that had once housed only one solitary man now rang with the sounds of family life. There were toys scattered on the floor, children's laughter echoing through the rooms, and a sense of fullness that Colton treasured. 2 years later, another son arrived whom they named Thomas. He was a quiet baby, content to observe the world around him with serious eyes. With 3 children, life in the mountain cabin was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. Penelope still tended her garden faithfully, now with 3 small helpers who loved digging in the dirt and watering the plants. Every morning, she would take the children out to pick flowers, and they would bring them inside to brighten the cabin. It was a ritual that connected them to the past, to that first summer when Colton had planted seeds just to see Penelope smile. "I still cannot believe you did this for me," Penelope said one morning, watching the children chase butterflies among the flowers. She was holding Colton's hand, her head resting on his shoulder. "An entire garden, just so I could have flowers every day. Best decision I ever made," Colton said. "Well, second best. The first was stopping your stepfather that day in Stockton." "I think they are tied," Penelope said with a smile. "Both decisions led to this life we have now." Samuel came running up, clutching a fistful of sunflowers. "Mama, I picked these for you." "They are beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you." Penelope took the flowers and kissed the top of his head. "Why do we not go inside and put them in water?" As the family headed back to the cabin, Colton hung back for a moment to look at the garden. It had grown over the years, expanding well beyond its original borders. There were vegetables and herbs now, but always there were flowers. Sunflowers and zinnias and cosmos and sweet peas, just like that first year. A living reminder of the day he had decided to give someone beauty for no reason other than that they deserved it. That decision had changed everything. It had brought love into his life and children, and a future he had never imagined. All because he had planted a garden for a woman who had never been given flowers before. Inside the cabin, Penelope was arranging Samuel's sunflowers in a jar while Margaret and Thomas played on the floor. Colton stood in the doorway watching them, his heart full to bursting. This was his legacy. Not the land he had claimed or the cabin he had built, but this family, these people who loved him and whom he loved in return. "Papa," Margaret called, noticing him in the doorway. "Come play with us." Colton crossed the room and scooped his daughter into his arms, making her giggle. "What are we playing?" "Garden," she announced. "I am planting flowers like Mama." "Are you now? Well, that is very important work." He settled onto the floor with all 3 children climbing over him and caught Penelope's eye across the room. She was smiling at him with such love and contentment that it took his breath away. Yes, he thought. This was everything. This was worth every moment of loneliness he had endured, every loss he had suffered, every choice that had led him to that street in Stockton on that August day in 1872. He would do it all again, go through it all again, just to end up here in this moment with this family. "I love you," Penelope mouthed silently. "I love you too," he mouthed back. And then Thomas was tugging on his beard, and Samuel was showing him a drawing, and Margaret was demanding he admire her pretend flowers. And Colton let himself be pulled into the wonderful chaos of family life, grateful for every single moment. Years continued to pass in a peaceful rhythm. The children grew, the garden bloomed, and Colton and Penelope's love deepened with each passing season. They had challenges, of course. There were lean winters when game was scarce, summers when drought threatened the garden, and the constant dangers of mountain life. But they faced everything together, as a team, and somehow that made even the hardest times bearable. Samuel grew into a serious young man who loved working with his father, learning to hunt and trap and care for the land. Margaret inherited her mother's love of growing things and could spend hours in the garden, talking to the plants as she tended them. Thomas surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for carving, creating beautiful wooden figures that Colton sold in town for extra money. When Samuel turned 18, he began courting a girl from Stockton, the daughter of the general store owner. Penelope wept happy tears when he announced his engagement, thrilled that her son had found someone to love. "It seems like just yesterday that we were bringing him home from town as a newborn," she said to Colton that night. "How did he grow up so fast?" "Time has a way of moving when you are not looking," Colton said, pulling her close. "But we still have Margaret and Thomas, and each other." "Always each other," Penelope agreed. They stood on the porch looking out at the garden, which was in full bloom despite the fact that they were now well into their 40s. The flowers were the same varieties Colton had planted all those years ago, descendants of those first seeds. Every year, Penelope saved seeds from the healthiest plants and replanted them, creating an unbroken chain that stretched back to that first summer. "You remember the day I told you I loved you?" Colton asked. "Standing right there by the first sunflower that bloomed." "Of course I remember." "It was the best day of my life up until that point." Penelope turned in his arms to face him. "You told me you planted the garden just for me because I said I had never been given flowers before. And I meant it, every word." He cupped her face in his hands, noting the fine lines that time had etched around her eyes and mouth. She was even more beautiful now than she had been at 23, ripened and deepened by years of love and life. "I would do it again. I would plant 1,000 gardens if it meant seeing you smile. You have given me so much more than flowers, Colton. You gave me a home, a family, a life filled with love. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." They kissed as the sun set behind them, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Margaret was married the following year to a young man from a neighboring mountain homestead, and Thomas apprenticed himself to a furniture maker in Sacramento, though he came home to visit often. The cabin grew quiet with just Colton and Penelope again, but it was a comfortable quiet, filled with years of memories and deep contentment. They still tended the garden together every summer, though their backs were not as strong as they once had been. They still picked flowers every morning, filling the cabin with color and life. And they still slept tangled together every night, holding onto each other as they had from the very beginning. When Colton was 55, he had a health scare that terrified them both. He collapsed while chopping wood, and Penelope had to ride down to Stockton alone to fetch the doctor. It turned out to be exhaustion and a minor heart issue, nothing immediately life-threatening, but it reminded them both that their time was not infinite. "You have to slow down," Penelope told him firmly when the doctor had left. "No more working from dawn to dusk. We have enough saved. We can take things easier now." "I do not know how to take things easy," Colton admitted. "I have been working hard my whole life." "Then learn." "Because I am not ready to lose you, Colton Zimmerman. We made a promise to grow old together, and I intend to hold you to it." He smiled and pulled her into his arms. "Yes, madam, I will slow down." And he did. They hired a young man from town to help with the heaviest work, and Colton focused his energy on spending time with Penelope and their growing number of grandchildren. Samuel and his wife had 4 children, Margaret had 3, and Thomas had just welcomed his first. The cabin became a gathering place for the whole family, especially in summer when everyone would come to help in the garden and pick flowers together. Penelope loved teaching her grandchildren about growing things, passing down the knowledge her own mother had given her. She would tell them stories about how their grandfather had planted the first seeds just to make her happy, and the children would look at the massive flower beds in awe. "Grandpa must really love you," one of Margaret's daughters said. "He does," Penelope agreed, smiling at Colton across the garden. "And I love him just as much." On their 30th wedding anniversary, Colton surprised Penelope by expanding the garden one more time. He had been working on it in secret with the help of their children, and when he led her outside that morning, she gasped to see that the garden had been doubled in size, with new varieties of flowers planted throughout. "Colton, when did you do all this?" "I had help," he admitted. "The children wanted to do something special for our anniversary, but it was my idea. I figured 30 years deserved some new flowers." Penelope walked through the expanded garden with tears in her eyes, touching each new plant gently. There were roses and lilies and delphiniums and so many other varieties she had mentioned wanting over the years. Colton had remembered every single one. "It is too much," she said, but she was smiling. "You spoil me. Never too much. And yes, I spoil you. That was always the plan." He took her hand and led her to a bench he had built in the center of the garden. "Sit with me." They sat together surrounded by flowers, holding hands and watching the sun rise over the mountains. They had done this hundreds of times over the years, but it never got old. Every morning with Penelope was a gift, every moment together precious. "Thank you," Penelope said softly, "for all of this. For every flower, every kindness, every day of the last 30 years. You have made me so happy, Colton." "You made me happy first," he reminded her. "You came into my life when I thought I wanted to be alone, and you showed me what I was missing. You gave me love and family and purpose. I am the one who should be thanking you." "Then we are both grateful," Penelope decided. "What a lucky pair we are." They sat in the garden until the rest of the family arrived to celebrate their anniversary with a feast and music and dancing. Their children and grandchildren filled the cabin and spilled out onto the land, and Colton looked around at all of them and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was his legacy. Not just the land or the cabin or the garden, but these people. These lives that had come from the love between him and Penelope. Every choice he had made, every seed he had planted, had led to this abundant harvest of family and joy. As the years continued to pass, Colton and Penelope slowed down more and more. They spent their days in quiet companionship, still tending a smaller section of the garden together, but mostly just enjoying each other's presence. They would sit on the porch in their rocking chairs, holding hands and watching their grandchildren play, content in the life they had built. When Colton turned 70, he finally admitted that he was tired. His body ached more than it used to, and simple tasks took more effort. But his mind was still sharp, and his love for Penelope had not dimmed one bit. "I do not regret a single day," he told her one evening. "Every moment with you has been a blessing, even the hard times." She asked, thinking of the winters they had struggled through, the sicknesses they had nursed each other through, the worries they had shared over their children. "Especially the hard times," he said. "Because we faced them together. That made all the difference." Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder, something she had been doing for nearly 40 years now. "I love you more today than I did when we married. I did not think that was possible, but it is true." "I know. I feel the same way." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the mountains they had called home for so long. The garden was blooming all around them, a testament to love and commitment, and the simple act of giving someone beauty for no reason other than that they deserved it. Colton Zimmerman lived to be 75 years old. He died peacefully in his sleep with Penelope beside him, having lived a full and happy life surrounded by love. His children and grandchildren mourned him deeply, but they also celebrated a life well lived and a love that had endured through everything. Penelope continued to tend the garden after he was gone, though it was harder without him. Every morning she would go out and pick flowers, talking to Colton as though he was still there beside her. "The sunflowers are especially beautiful this year," she would say. "You would love them." She lived for another 5 years, long enough to see great-grandchildren born and to pass on her knowledge of gardening to a new generation. When she finally passed, also peacefully in her sleep, her children buried her next to Colton on the hill overlooking the garden they had tended together for so many years. The cabin and land passed to Samuel, who maintained it with the same love and care his father had shown. The garden continued to bloom every summer, tended by Samuel's children and eventually their children. It became a family tradition, this garden that Colton had planted so long ago just to make one woman happy. And on quiet mornings, when the mist rose from the valley and the sunflowers turned their faces toward the rising sun, it was said that you could still feel the presence of Colton and Penelope in that place. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that transcended time itself, all because a mountain man had planted a garden for a woman who had never been given flowers before. The story of their love became family legend, passed down through generations. Great-great-grandchildren would stand in the garden and hear about how their ancestor had stopped a man from hurting a stranger, had brought her to his mountain home, and had planted seeds so she could have beauty in her life. They heard about how that simple act of kindness had grown into a love story that spanned decades and produced a family tree that now numbered in the dozens. And every summer, when the flowers bloomed in riotous color across the mountain garden, the family would gather to celebrate Colton and Penelope's anniversary. They would pick flowers together, tell stories about the couple who had started it all, and remember that love is not just grand gestures, but also daily acts of care and attention. It is planting a garden just so someone can pick flowers every morning. It is choosing kindness when you could walk away. It is building a life together one small moment at a time until those moments add up to forever. The garden still blooms today, tended by the 5th generation of Zimmermans. The flowers are descendants of those first seeds Colton bought in Stockton in the summer of 1872, an unbroken chain of growth and beauty that connects the past to the present. And in the center of the garden stands a marker that Samuel placed there after his parents died, engraved with simple words that captured the essence of their love story. She had never been given flowers before, so he planted a garden and gave her beauty every day for the rest of their lives. Colton and Penelope Zimmerman, forever together. It is a testament to the power of love, to the importance of kindness, and to the simple truth that sometimes the most meaningful gifts are not things we buy, but things we create with our own hands and give from our hearts. Colton Zimmerman planted a garden for Penelope Mitchell, and in doing so, planted the seeds of a love that would bloom for generations to come.